Good, good evening. This is the City of Everett, Washington Planning Commission meeting for December 7, 2021. We'll call this meeting to order, and we will begin with a roll call.
Thank you. Chair Yanasak?
Here.
Commissioner Beck?
Here.
Commissioner Lavra?
Here.
Commissioner McGinn?
Here.
Commissioner Finch?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let me begin with instructions for participants tonight, given our remote setting. Planning Commission meetings do remain remote for the time being. If you are accessing this meeting via phone, please be aware that there is about a 10-second delay on the broadcast and stream. If you wish to download the presentation materials or wish to comment and need to see the visual in real time, please visit everettwa.gov/planningcommission. I would like to remind anyone participating to please mute your microphone, or if you are calling in, mute your phone by pressing *6 until called upon. Thank you for your patience, and stay tuned for more information about bringing the Planning Commission back to in-person meetings. With that, we'll move on to approval of minutes. I hope commissioners have received and had a chance to review the draft minutes from our November 2nd meeting. If you have had the opportunity and have any changes or comments, we can go ahead and do that right now.
This is Commissioner Lavra. I did just see one typo. There were just a couple words left out on, let's see here. On the second page, where it's a motion from Commissioner Holland, it says made, and I think the two words "a motion" are left out.
Okay, I see. It says Commissioner Holland made close the public hearing, so just need a couple words added in there.
I can do that.
Okay, anything else? Anyone else? Okay, with that change, is there a motion to approve?
I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Thank you, Commissioner Lavra. Do I have a second?
I second. This is Commissioner McGinn.
Thank you. Kathy, if you could call a vote.
Commissioner Finch?
Yes.
Commissioner McGinn?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavra?
Yes.
Commissioner Beck?
Abstain.
Chair Yanasak?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any commissioners with anything to report? Okay, hearing none. Yorick, we'll hear from staff.
Thank you, Chair Yanasak. Just a couple items this evening. Looking back to previous items that have been before the Planning Commission, the Council took up the proposed ordinance amending the setbacks in the UR3 zone within Metro Everett in Chapter 1906 of EMC. It's been through its first two readings, and the public hearing is tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. with the City Council. Have not heard much in the way of significant questions or concerns about that. I will report back on how that final step in the process went at our next meeting. In regional planning, Snohomish County Tomorrow Steering Committee, that's the group of elected officials that represent cities and the county and the Tulalip tribes in the interjurisdictional realm of policy coordination. Completed its work on the growth targets, population and employment growth targets that will guide the comprehensive plan updates for all the cities and unincorporated areas within Snohomish County. They completed that their work and did recommend approval of the growth targets at the level that I've mentioned a couple times, and there's a slide on that later on tonight with the comprehensive plan. Last Wednesday, there was a fair amount of discussion about Everett in both meetings at the steering committee level, and I expect that to continue in the final step of the process of adopting those targets, which is the county council, and that's expected in January and February. There have been a few comment letters submitted to Snohomish County Tomorrow, as well as to the county itself in their comprehensive plan update scoping process, just expressing some concern about whether Everett can grow to the level that is anticipated by those growth targets. And I think we certainly understand the challenge. You'll hear a lot about the process by which we will put pen to paper and more thoroughly vet those targets and work to accommodate and plan for and make the most of those targets in the comprehensive plan periodic update process. But our message back to the steering committee was that staff sees it as feasible that we achieve those targets, and that we have taken significant actions such as Rethink Housing and Rethink Zoning and Metro Everett to point to our way towards the successful achievement of those targets, and that we will, as I said, put pen to paper here pretty soon with our comprehensive plan periodic update. So stay tuned for the final step in that process, which is again the county council consideration in expected January and February. In Planning Commission news, I am sad to report that this is Commissioner Beck's last meeting. Commissioner Beck's term ends at the end of this month. This is our last meeting of the month and the year. And Catherine Beck was appointed, if my records serve us right, was appointed to fill a vacancy in late 2015, and then was reappointed for a 5-year term in January 2016, ending at the end of 2021. And by all accounts, Catherine served her terms on the commission well, provided great input, questions, and votes along the way. That's a long time to be hitched to a piece of work every other Tuesday night. And I certainly, speaking on behalf of staff, I certainly appreciate the dedication that all 7 or 9 of you bring to your work and reading lots of packets and spending your Tuesday evenings doing something that may be fun for some of you. You'd be among the minority of folks who might join me in thinking this kind of thing is interesting and fun. But it's certainly a piece of work, and it's a lot of volunteer hours. I certainly appreciate it. So thank you, Commissioner Beck. And I'd like to, I'll just wrap up that we're working with the mayor's office to identify candidates for appointment. We'll keep you posted on that. But I also wanted to just open up if anybody had any words of thanks for Commissioner Beck or otherwise. Otherwise, that wraps up my staff comments for today.
Thank you, Yorick. Commissioner Beck, a kind of a historic night. Does anybody want to say now? We could definitely come back to this at the end as well. If anyone, but feel free to chime in now.
Roasts would be appropriate.
Well,
okay.
we will not conclude. We will not conclude without coming back and circling back to that for a few moments at least.
That sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Yorick. Before we move into either of the 2 items that are on the agenda, we do want to open up to see if there are any citizen comments, anybody wishing to address the commission on any matter that is not on the agenda tonight. So if you are here and wishing to address the commission now, we don't have a huge group. I would just say go ahead and unmute your device and go ahead and just get our attention, and we'll hear from you.
And Chair Yanasak, I'm still sort of new here, so I wanted to just confirm. I do see a few members from the public, and I don't know if they were interested in making any comments on the 2 items that are before us tonight, with the comprehensive plan periodic update and an update on the Sound Transit light rail extension. When would if somebody wanted to make some comment on either of those topics, would they,
Yes,
we're not
sure.
doing public hearings tonight, so would they do that at the very end of the meeting?
I think what we'll do is we will hear from staff and have a brief presentation as to each of the agenda items. And at the conclusion of that, commissioners will ask some questions, and then we'll go ahead and open that up for anybody who's here from the public who wish to make any comments on that. So so if you are here for one of those items, go ahead, hold on a little bit longer. We will get to you on those, but this is just an opportunity for anything that's not on the agenda.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
And I'm not hearing anybody speak up here. So with that, let's go ahead and move into the first item on the agenda, which is identified as item 6, Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update Work Program. And it looks like Becky is going to present on that.
Yes, good evening, commissioners. We're excited to be here to share information about this important project. I'm going to share my screen. And if somebody could let me know when you can see it.
Yes, you're good.
Great. Okay, so we're talking about the 2024 to 2044 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update. So we've talked about this before, but this is a more detailed introduction for the Planning Commission. So our objectives tonight are to go over project overview and objectives, and to also give you some information about the process. We also want to talk about the Planning Commission's role in the update project. And then we'll have these questions at the end, but I wanted to give them to you at the beginning so you could have them in your mind as we go through the presentation. But we'd like your feedback on the questions of when we talk about the phases of the project, do they capture the process as the Planning Commission understands the project? And what are Planning Commission's priorities, both in terms of the process and policy? And then thinking ahead a little bit, what are the range of alternatives that should be considered during the comprehensive plan update? And then what can we learn during the environmental analysis process? And then finally, we would like your feedback and ideas on our initial public participation program outline. So what is a periodic update? For some of the commissioners who maybe weren't here before or during the last one, or members of the public, the periodic update is we are advancing the 20-year planning period. So right now our current comprehensive plan is 2015, covers 2015 to 2035, that 20 years. Well, here we are at 2021, so that's 6 years plus. And so now it's time to adjust. And so there's been changes, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but really we're just adjusting the plan to the next increment of 20 years. This update will accommodate new growth targets, both in terms of population and employment. We'll definitely have to address new or revised state law or regional policies, and we'll go over what those are. We want to confirm the city's vision, or maybe the vision for the community has changed. And then in that way, we would want to make sure that the goals and policies that we have align with that vision. There's certainly many inventories and data factors and capital improvement plan updates that we'll need to do as part of this project. And then finally, to implement the vision, goals, and policies, we will need to have the development regulations and maps that go along with implementing the comprehensive plan. So just a little bit about how the policy intersects with actions. At the top level, the Growth Management Act, we're required as a city of our size in an urban environment to plan under the Growth Management Act, and the city has been doing that for many years. And then also at the top tier is the Puget Sound Regional Council, which we are a part of. And that We'll talk about Vision 2050, which was an update of their plan for the 4-county region. And so there are policies that will come out of that. Those feed into the countywide planning policy process, which we've just completed, and we'll talk where that is in the process. So all of that filters down to the city's comprehensive plan. And we will share with you what's kind of new and some of the key topics that will go into this project for the comprehensive plan. And then, as I mentioned, the development regulations that implement the policies. So we're looking at plan update project input. So in order to update our plan, there's a number of layers of data and other policies that will feed into our work. First, on the data side, the 2020 U.S. Census, that will include some demographic information. It will include income and housing information. They have released some, basic data, but we will also get more data in the months to come. They'll be released in phases. The Washington State Office of Financial Management, they update annually population estimates for all the cities. So we will have a couple of those updates during this project. And then, as you would probably recall, the 2021 buildable lands, which identified land capacity analysis for both population and employment. And then there's certainly a lot of other data that we need to update, and I just listed a few here. Definitely school enrollment, that's important data that we get. Any new transportation data. You've heard already about parks and their update, and then something that we need to be taking a look at, which is displacement risk analysis. On the policy side, the GMA and other state legislation that happens during the interim period of a comp plan. And one particular I'm thinking of is ES2HB 1220. And that has to do with housing. And there are some directives in there regarding comprehensive plans. So the PSRC Vision 2050, we've talked about that. That is the regional growth strategy and has employment and population projections and those multi-county planning policies that we must pay attention to. The countywide planning policies talk about interjurisdictional cooperation, development patterns, among other things. And that is where we've done our initial growth target setting. Under the Everett Comprehensive Plan, of course, the vision, goals, policies, and objectives of the city that were established in 2015 for this current planning period. And then, as you might recall, the Housing Action Plan also will be an input to this project as it identified policies, objectives, and actions that should move forward as well. It's a good time to incorporate all of that. We presented this to graphic before, but the blue line shows where we are. So those precursors, the Vision 2050, the countywide planning policies, the buildable lands initial target setting is basically complete. Just waiting for the county council to adopt those initial targets. And so we are getting ready to jump into our comprehensive plan update process. And it's about a 2.5-year window for us to get this work done. So we've identified 5 phases of this project that will occur between 2022 and 2024. In the early phase, we will do what we call our formal scoping period, and that is something that we want to go out to the public and say, this is what we have to do. These are the growth targets. What should we be thinking about? What should we be including? Also during this phase, we're going to be doing a lot of that data update and analyzing existing conditions. And then it is also our opportunity to share with the community and others about the project. During phase 2, which we think will be mid-2022, 2 is the time where we will develop growth alternatives to be evaluated. So we'll be taking a lot of input. We'll be taking some of the data that we've learned and start to develop alternatives that we want to study in the environmental impact statement. So that is something that would occur in 2022. During phase 3, we would actually start to really have some detailed alternatives and release those alternatives with the environmental analysis, taking a look at what those alternatives would mean in terms of environmental impact. So again, that will include a public comment period. So we will continually be getting feedback. And then phase 4, which happens early 2023 to late 2023, that's really the meat of the update, where we will be issuing a draft plan with a preferred alternative. And then we will supplement the environmental impact statement if needed as we develop the preferred alternative if the impact hasn't been included in the original draft statement. And then finally, we will move into the adoption process. So we have estimated late 2023 to mid 2024. And the reason for that, we really want to have a plan adopted through council by the end of May for a couple reasons. Our due date to the Department of Commerce is June 30th of 2024. And, you know, as we go through the adoption process, it may be that there's some changes that occur. And if there is something in there that's greater than the environmental impacts that we've studied, we're going to need to do a supplemental review of that. So during this whole process, I should mention, we'll move to the next phase or next slide, but I have community outreach here on the bottom, but there are going to be periods of time where the work is going to be done behind the scenes before we're back out to the public. So we're working on more of a detailed schedule that would give some dates and certainty, but keeping in mind that there may be periods where there's nothing, it looks like nothing's happening, but there's definitely things going on. So I did kind of go through this already, but I wanted to maybe take a look at the phases and thinking about the questions that we're asking during these phases. During the scoping period, you know, what should the update focus on? Where should we be spending our time focusing on? In terms of the growth alternatives. Phase 2, as we draft those alternatives, are they the right alternatives? And then after we take a look at the draft environmental impact statement of those draft alternatives, you know, which alternative performs the best? What is the community able to tolerate and absorb? In the phase 4, when we look at the preferred alternative, you know, how did the preferred alternative perform and what changes should be considered before we actually finalize that plan and take it into the adoption process? And then finally, during that adoption process, does the plan reflect public input? Does it meet the requirements of the periodic update? We have to submit to both the Department of Commerce for our plan has to be approved by them, as well as the Puget Sound Regional Council. Our plan must be certified by them. So there are several lengthy checklists that we have to go through to meet requirements. And then finally, does it achieve the objective of adequately accommodating growth? So those are some questions to be thinking about in terms of what the phases mean and what we're trying to get from members of the community. So our public participation, this is kind of really a snapshot, but your packet had a little more detail to this. We plan to host workshop series or open houses. Those will be done at this point. We will continue to do them virtually, similar to what we did with the housing action plan with Rethink Housing. We are going to be, as staff availability is, available to meet with focus groups, such as the development community. We could meet with NAACP. We could meet with Rotary clubs. There's just a number of groups in the community that I guess virtual makes that easy to attend meetings and share information and get feedback. We'll also be doing some heavy agency consultant outreach as we want to make sure that our partnering agencies are planning the way that we are and we're planning for them. Our existing boards and commissions are great ambassadors, and so we want to make sure they're included in this process so they can reach out to folks they know in the community. Anytime there's an outreach event, we'll do what we can. In person is still a little bit of a challenge, but we will continue to monitor that. And then we want to have good media interactions. We'll be working with our communications department, both in terms of the media interactions and the social media. They're really good at helping us work through the best way to push information out. We're going to be creating a project web page, which will be in sort of a presentation format. It's called story mapping, and so we want to be able to tell a really good story. We want the web page to be as interactive as possible and make sure that it's up to date and that anybody that needs to know what's happening can go to the website and get that information. So along with that, we want a good information library. There might be papers or information on certain subjects that we feel are important. So it would be sort of a resource library. Want to make sure we've got a good project calendar up there. And then what we'll talk a little bit about more here in a few minutes is Planning Commission briefings and how that will interact with this project. And then City Council briefings, making sure that we're keeping both the Planning Commission and the City Council apprised of what's happening, as well as the things that we're hearing from the community. So you had a couple of maps in your packet, and we just wanted to share those maps with you because, you know, these are all things that will need to be updated. And I'm showing you the version on the screen is the map that will actually be effective January 1st. That reflects that Smith Island correction that we made on the comprehensive plan resource area, and so that'll be effective January 1st. But just in a few observations that we had looking at previous updates, in that you know, the last two plans really, the land use map has remained largely the same. There was, in the last plan update, a separate land capacity analysis conducted, and we are also hoping to include that in our update that would supplement buildable lands, basically. The Metro Everett sub-area plan was done in 2018, so it was done after the plan was adopted, even though we did make some changes to the comp plan as a result of Metro Everett. And then also we had the Rethink Zoning, which updated zoning regulations and consolidated some zones in 2020. So those are just things to think about in terms of, you know, where we've been with the comp plan. Now we'll get into a little bit of the details and numbers. So here is the population and employment targets. I have a note there that says 20% of the projected population and 39% of the projected employment of the countywide growth projections should come to Everett according to Vision 2050. So those percentages are based on that 2050 population. So you could see that we're doing an increment of that. But when you take a look at the buildable lands, you will see Everett's population for 2044 is about 22% of the county, and I believe it was 39% for Everett. So those are some big numbers. The first column you see there, so you see the current growth target. That's the population total that we expected in 2035. Under the buildable lands, we're showing capacity at this point for about 151,000, which means the buildable lands is saying that we have a capacity deficit of about 13,800 people. So we will have to also address this, what they call shortfall. So in 2024, currently, the total population would be just under 180,000. We have a to be determined under the 2021 buildable lands capacity, because again, we're not sure. But if we take the 2024-2044 planning period, that equates to approximately 69,000 more people coming into Everett at by that planning horizon of 2044. So this is definitely complicated, and so if we need to go back over this, we can when I'm done. So same for employment. That's just about the same amount of employment that we would expect to see in the new planning period. We definitely could accommodate under the buildable lands the employment target that we had. So there's another 27,000 here for the new planning period of 2024, or excuse me, 2044. Those are hard to say, 2024, 2044. Anyway, so I'm gonna move on, and then like I said, we can come back to this if needed. So you've seen this graphic before. Yorick shared this with you. That's just a way to show what I just described in a graphic form. So you can see the 2050 regional growth strategy out further as that line progresses. So, and back here is the 2035 growth target, 2044. I want to focus a little bit on a key topic. Some of them are more of a focus in this update from PSRC. But those key topics are growth targets, looking at the land capacity, making sure the reasonable measures relates to the shortfall that we had for the current planning period. Transit-oriented development is something that is going to become more and more important moving forward, especially as we, that next thing underneath there, light rail station planning and transit-oriented development, and really benefiting from the transportation investments that are coming here. Stormwater, environmental quality, climate change, those climate change, and I would say transit-oriented development, and then that next one, racial disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion in housing is another new focus for the plan update. And then some of the other things that we will be looking at is the historic preservation and annexation. So we wanted to get some feedback about the Planning Commission's role, but this is what we saw as primarily the Commission's role in this 2.5-year project, and that would be to provide regular and ongoing feedback. There's a potential that you could host some workshops, say start a meeting an hour early, hour and a half early, and invite the public to come in. That would give the Planning Commission an opportunity to hear directly from the community. We think that there could be some opportunity to form some subcommittees when we need it on a special topics. And then really helping us and giving us some guidance as we develop those alternatives that we want to study, and then taking them forward to reach the preferred alternative. And then probably your most important role is a recommendation to the City Council on the update project. So we're kind of back to those 4 questions. That was a lot of information, but I'll just read the questions and then maybe turn it back to you, Chair Yanasak, to maybe guide us through some of the feedback. So did we miss anything? Have we missed anything? Well, most importantly, do you have any questions about the material that we presented as well? What are your priorities, both process and policy? What can we learn during the environmental analysis process? And what are your early thoughts about alternatives that we should study? And then finally, what ideas do you have about reaching the city's residents, businesses, and other stakeholders? So I'll leave the questions up and turn it back over to you, Chair Yanasak.
Thank you, Becky. Maybe we could start with any questions that commissioners might have, and then we can come back to the questions that you have.
Great.
So, commissioners, any questions for Becky? Or I suppose any comments as well that maybe don't address these specific questions that staff is asking. Okay, sounds like no questions or comments. Maybe then let's maybe address question number 1. Is there anyone that has any thoughts about whether or not anything might be missing here from the presentation? Mr. Finch, should I see you trying to jump in?
No, nothing for me. I don't feel like anything was missed. I thought the memo and the presentation was very thorough. Thank you.
And I'll just add, I thought everything looked pretty good and thorough as well. So I don't hear any other, anyone with any contrary comments. Maybe we'll move on to question 2 then about priorities, process and policy. Anybody have any input or anything to add or comment about that? Or maybe any commissioner members want to just talk about their priorities, what they think priorities should be.
I will say that all 4 of these questions will remain with us through the life of the project, so keep these types of things in mind. I will say how it's a challenge to try to scope out a long project and a long process like this. Very well done, Becky, both in the presentation and pulling the materials together. We're at the very front end of the process, and so it's hard to think all the way through a 2-year process. And we know some of the inputs, we know some of the structure and the process, and some of the key focus, especially those that have come from external new changes to state law, new policies at the regional level, things like that. But a lot of this will just be developing over time as we get into it. And I recognize that it is hard both for us at a staff level and then also for the Planning Commission to really think through proactively until we have some good things to respond to. But I just wanted to say that these questions will be just as valid next month and 2 years from now as they are today. So
Thank you for that comment, York. I think that's well taken. I certainly don't think that a lack of input today or response to those questions would indicate anything wrong with the presentation or about indicate that you're not on the right track. I would agree. Speaking for me, this is all, coming first time, really diving into this and seeing this, and probably haven't had enough time to really process and come up with too many responses. But definitely nothing negative from me in my lack of input or response.
Great. Yeah, it will get easier. Becky, your screen switched to Teams.
Yeah.
You don't need to see my Teams.
And maybe then we'll just say the two other questions here about what we can learn. Any commissioners have any response to that today? Commissioner McGinn.
Hi, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time to add this priority, but I know in the past there's been discussion about guiding the overall design with possibly design review board of developments that are proposed within the city. I do think that in conjunction with that, I would like to see protections made for historic buildings, especially within our downtown. I know that some protections have been made for our historic neighborhoods, but downtown is still vulnerable to development. And I do think that these are the kinds of things that still set Everett apart and make us unique as a town. We have a lot geographically that makes us unique and desirable to build in, but I also think that architecturally we need to be thinking long-term about really the longevity of these developments. Are the materials that are being used appropriate long-term? Are the designs flexible enough to accommodate future growth? I think that these kinds of things can be addressed by a design review board. I know that there are alternatives to the design review board process, but I would like to start having these conversations as we start to see a lot of development happening downtown and on our waterfronts. There are already, I think, opportunities missed, and it's a real bummer moment. We're like, oh dang, we're gonna be living with that for generations. Let's regroup. Maybe we can start to have some of those conversations too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see Commissioner Finch, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on Ms. McCrary's suggestions about how the Planning Commission can be involved. I think that those were, I guess from my perspective, all encouraged. I particularly like the idea of hosting a workshop in advance of the Planning Commission meeting. I think in any outreach effort, but especially when we're talking about long-term planning, it's important to encourage as many different viewpoints from stakeholders as possible. And I want to make sure, especially during this COVID at-home period, that we're getting comments from citizens that are not just paid to comment, but also may not otherwise be reached. And so I think that the diversity of these kinds of engagement opportunities is great.
Thank you. It is nice to have a big project to focus on too, because there's always little dribs and drabs of opportunities to comment on individual projects and things, but it's a rare opportunity to really kind of go outside and wave a big sign and say, this is a big deal. Please come and tell us give us your input, which makes me think that also using those other public input Becky gets to hear random ideas that pop into my head all the time about this comp plan update. And, you know, a lot of people have spent their time giving testimony and writing comments and writing letters on little pieces, whether it's Rethink Housing or Rethink Zoning or the last comp plan update that was 8 years ago, but still many of those priorities remain valid, or commented at the county level or the regional level. And so I think one thing that we can do as staff is go out and find those comment reports and find those comments that have already been done without even having to go out fresh. We certainly will go out and hear the updated comments, but I know the countywide planning policy process generated hundreds of comments, and many of those were probably in Everett and probably had some insightful thoughts. I also wanted to just what I heard from Commissioner McGinn is a couple good points on design review. That has come up in a couple places in terms of making sure that growth, you know, those growth targets are pretty significant. That's going to mean a lot of development, a lot of redevelopment, and a lot of change. And the only way that that is going to work is with the support of the community. And to get the support of the community, it's got to be well designed and thoughtful and integrated into individual neighborhoods. I think we've talked about this in past meetings, how Rethink Zoning added a lot of design concepts into the code. And as I understand it, our goal was to try to have those things either required or reviewed administratively without the design review board step. But that is always something that we can reevaluate. But just that design, and then the attention to historic preservation. So I've heard that a couple times now. I definitely agree that that is one of the charms of the city and one of the things that makes Everett unique within Snohomish County. And it is something to be very protective of. We have those districts, we have historic preservation programs and designations at the city level, a historic commission, and we will certainly punt that question to them to give us as much advice as they can, because they're knowledgeable and passionate about that topic. And I guess it's just thinking, I'm trying to think through what our existing process to protect important historic structures. And I think it's mainly incentive based. And Becky knows more about this than I do. You did a lot of work with the Historic Commission, but we have incentives to get your building designated, which frees up low interest loans for renovations and can have property tax breaks. And so it's all about trying to support the preservation and adaptive reuse of that building, but maybe not so much on the protection side, on actually prohibiting development or something like that. So that's something to think about. Maybe the incentives is doing a good job, but maybe there's more we can do.
Thank you. Any other commissioner questions or comments before we move on to public comments?
I wanted to highlight question 3, and we don't need we'll be back to you, like I said, multiple times with these sorts of questions. So number 3 is going to be a very formal question that we will be posing to you and the council and the community. And that is in that scoping process where we set the scope, and that's kind of the guardrails or the outer limits of what this update may result in. Planning is not a linear thing, so it's not like our range is going to be between 4 and 7. It's unfortunately not that easy to really have kind of a linear scope like that. But when we develop alternatives that we will study, discrete alternatives, some hopefully small number given our resources of alternatives that we will study in the environmental review process. Ultimately, if we can't go outside those alternatives, I guess, just to make it brief. So we want to give a proper range of scenarios that we go and do the detailed analysis on and report out how they perform And when Becky said, how well does this alternative perform, we would look to indicators like our expected impacts on housing affordability, impacts on traffic congestion, water quality, air quality, all the things that make for, I guess, quality of life, to put briefly. That is an opportunity for us to learn. We're only going to do this once for a long time now, and it's a pretty big investment of effort into the environmental review process. We're hoping to secure some resources to hire consultants to get some good scientific background and real quantitative methods in there. Often you see that in like the travel modeling or air quality, but it could be in other areas as well, economic analysis for housing affordability. So we're going to need to develop a couple of alternatives, and those are going to be mainly on the land use side and mainly like the spatial distribution of growth and development and housing. Those alternatives could be something like high growth, low growth. They could be different distributions of population and employment growth, and we don't have to set it up in a way that we think one of them is the best answer and the other one is like a straw man. It can just be things that we're interested in learning about. What if we put literally all of the growth in Everett into that parking lot behind me in downtown Everett? And how does that differ from putting literally all of the growth in Everett into one accessory dwelling unit in every single house within Everett? Extreme examples, probably not going to want either of those to occur, and those are too extreme to even study, but that does give somewhat of an idea of the types of alternatives that we can do. And that's going to be really important because we'll decide what the alternatives are. We're going to go away and we're going to study them, hopefully with consultants, with staff, with other departments, and we're going to come back and we're going to say, well, it turns out if you put 70,000 people in the parking lot downtown Everett, then you have a really tough time, with this kind of area, and it's really expensive to build that tall or something like that. And then with that information in hand, then we will have to drive towards a preferred alternative, the actual plan that we want to do. And likely, I think we will restudy that preferred alternative. It could be a hybrid of multiple alternatives. It could be one of the alternatives itself. And then after kind of confirming that seems to be the right approach, you might tinker with it at the end and then move on to actually adopting a plan. All of that starts with that first question of what do we want to learn about? What are the differences that are important and likely going to be part of the conversation? And essentially, what are the 3 or 4 alternatives that we want to actually draw lines and areas and colors on maps and then go and see how I guess the scientists or quasi-scientists think that would how that would turn out in the end. So food for thought. That will be the scoping phase that will be coming before we know it, early next year. But I just wanted to give a little bit more of a description about what that piece means, because it is probably the most important and the most impactful and throughout the whole process.
Yeah, thank you, York. That did help me understand that a little better as well. So thank you. Let's see if we do have anybody from the public here wishing to address us on this topic. Kathy, was anybody pre-signed up?
Yeah, there was nobody signed up, but there are guests here tonight.
Okay. Any guests wishing to speak? I think we're a fairly small group. I would say go ahead, unmute your device, and we will go ahead and identify yourself, and we'll recognize you.
Hello, this is Ismail Mohammed. I just want to commend the commission and the staff for taking up this huge project. And I have no comments right now, but I will be participating as we go along during the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mohammed. Anybody else?
Good evening. My name is Glennis Casey, and I'm the Community Planning Liaison Officer at Naval Station Everett. And I'm joining your Planning Commission meetings to hear what is going on with your schedule and to keep up to date. And, you know, so I'll be ready to interface with you at, as you progress through your planning schedule in the next couple of years. But I also think that it's great what you're doing, and good job. Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to reach out to us or contact us by email, and we would love to begin a dialogue with you too.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, any final closing comments, additional comments from staff before we move on to the next topic then?
Thank you for your comments, and we look forward to the work ahead. Thank you.
Great, yeah, that's going to be a long-term project here. Okay, with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, number 7, the Everett Link Light Rail Extension Early Scoping Letter. York, I think that's going to be you presenting.
That will. Okay, yes, unmuted. And do you see a big blue screen? Oops.
We do.
Okay. Thank you, York Stevens Watson Planning Director. So you received a copy, I hope, in your Planning Commission packet of the draft letter for that is from the City of Everett to Sound Transit for their scoping phase, early scoping phase. They're going to do 2 of them, but their early scoping phase for the light rail extension into Everett. I think you're all aware of the broad strokes of what this project is. It's extending light rail from downtown Linwood to downtown Everett. I think it's the longest light rail extension underway in the country right now. And it's a big deal. I should have had some numbers on the number of billions of dollars involved and miles of track and all that, but suffice it to say that it's a big deal. This is a short graphic on the process with Sound Transit. So there is a team from City of Everett staff, planning, public works, transit, economic development, communications, and the mayor's office that has been following this project closely through the screening phase. That was the first phase. It started right about when I started with the city in April. And you see this funnel that is driving at a preferred alternative. This is kind of like the same funnel that I was describing for the comprehensive plan update. This is a lot easier to wrap your mind around because it is essentially a line on a map, a couple stations, and an operations and maintenance facility versus, all the things that go into a comprehensive plan. The process started with a screening process where they threw a whole bunch of spaghetti noodles on the wall that could be potential light rail alignments and station locations and operations and maintenance facility locations, and put it through a very basic screening process that knocked out most of those possibilities, the criteria. So these are all the groups who have a role in this process, and of course the public is asked to comment to all of these and throughout the process. And then going back one slide, you can see those same colors, and basically in the bottom right there, that dark blue is the Sound Transit Board. That's the final decision on the preferred alternative, and you can follow those lines back up to the earlier groups and recommendations. We're at the scoping phase. Note on the top right there, there's a lot of overlap between our comprehensive plan periodic update, and we hope to draw on some of Sound Transit's work in the community engagement realm to kind of piggyback on that work and ask the same folks that they're asking, where should we put a maintenance facility? We would like to ask them, what else do you see as contributing to a good future for Everett? We just completed a realignment process. By we, I guess that's Sound Transit and the Sound Transit Board. You may have heard in the news that there's a fairly substantial shortfall in revenue. Well, the revenue shortfall was a little bit, the cost escalation was a lot. Most of that due to land values. A lot of land needs to be purchased for a light rail line of this length, and all of that land, same reason we're having housing affordability problems, has gotten much more expensive since the ballot measure was passed. Materials, concrete, steel, and all that have also gotten more expensive. So we were facing a pretty significant shortfall. I think it's about $600 million for this line. And the Sound Transit Board adopted a realignment by which, unless we can identify $600 million in cost savings or new revenue, that we would have to stop we would have to build the light rail extension in 2 phases. By 2037, we would get all the way up to Southwest Everett, the solid line in my scribble there. And then as late as 2041, the extension would make it all the way up into downtown Everett, the dashed line. So we are certainly in the market for $600 million in funding or savings if anybody knows anybody with a lot of money. The scoping process defines a project purpose and need and asks the public and these jurisdictions like the City of Everett to comment on that and make sure that they got the purpose and need right. The purpose and need then turn into criteria by which Sound Transit will review the different alternatives and use those criteria to define a preferred alternative that best meets the project purpose and need. All of that is in the scoping information report. Great document, gives a great overview of where we're at now with the extension, and I summarize it here on these 2 slides. The purpose is to build high quality, rapid, reliable, accessible, and efficient light rail transit service to improve regional mobility, to connect regional centers, and in our neck of the woods, those regional centers are Everett, downtown Linwood, Bothell Canyon Park, and then moving south to Northgate and downtown Seattle along the line. So connecting those centers to each other. We need to make sure that this is financially feasible to build, operate, and maintain. So within the resources given by the voters in ST3. And then the purpose is to expand mobility, including explicit consideration for transit-dependent, low-income, and minority populations. Moving on, it's equitable and sustainable growth in station areas. It's convenient, safe, and equitable non-motorized access. It is, this is an important one, a healthy environment and economy that is supported by minimizing adverse impacts on the natural, built, and social environments. And then we need an operations and maintenance facility. So that is the purpose of the extension as Sound Transit sees it, and that is one of the things that we are responding to in this scoping letter. The project need is kind of along the same lines as that purpose. We need to address the chronic roadway congestion on our north-south corridors, I-5 and SR-99, which are of course expected to worsen with growth. We have a number of plans that call for high capacity transit in the corridor, from Sound Transit's Sound Move back in the 90s to our countywide planning policies and Vision 2050, our own comprehensive plan. All the plans call for high capacity transit in the corridor. We need long-term multimodal regional mobility. All these plans called for increased density around high capacity stations and better multimodal access. And so this project can help deliver some of that. And we need to address climate change by minimizing vehicle miles traveled and supporting alternatives to that. And we need an operations and maintenance facility. Have to have mention of that. So I'll go through where we're at now with the potential alignments here pretty quickly. So you see it's going to go up the I-5 corridor, turn left on Airport Road, turn right on 526, and then turn left on I-5 is essentially the directions the train operators will be following. You see a big spread of options at the West Alderwood station. So they're deciding whether to go north, south, east, or west of the mall, essentially. Ashway, it could be east or west of I-5 is a big question. Does that go along where the interurban trail corridor is on the east side of I-5 with a station that might serve places like Mill Creek a little bit better because you wouldn't have to cross I-5 and all those intersections are pretty rough to get to the station, whether by bus or drop off or something. Mariner Station, all those four alternatives are pretty close to each other. Same thing with the Evergreen Way and Airport Road Station. It's just kind of a question of which side of the intersection it's going to be on. Moving north, the line could be on either side of Airport Road. Some intrigue at the Southwest Everett Industrial Center Station. Will it be closer to the Payne Field Airport terminal, but not at it? Or will it be closer to Boeing Everett Production Facility, but not at it? Both would be just a little bit, Boeing Everett is so big that even if you're in one spot of it, you still need to shuttle to get around a lot of it. The terminal likewise is, close to the runways. And so we'd need to have some little connection. Might be a long walk, might be a little shuttle or something. SR 526 and Evergreen Way Station, same kind of thing. Four corners of the intersection of Casino Road and Evergreen Way, or possibly on the north side of SR 526 near the new Four Corners development on the old Kmart site. And then options on whether the actual tracks go on Casino Road or on either side of SR 526. From there, the tracks could go on Broadway, although I don't think it'll wind up there, but it could, or I-5. And then really interesting to see the different options for Everett Station. One would follow the existing railroad tracks and put a station right on the parking lot that's in front of Everett Station itself. The other options would come up McDougal or Broadway with a station around Pacific and Broadway. I mentioned the operations and maintenance facility. There are 6 options, and then there's a 7th actually farther south on I-5 at 164th, I think it is, where Crane Manufacturing is. That's just off of this, but I was focusing on the ones that are within the city of Everett. So there's one option at Gibson Road on Evergreen Way, and then the other 5 options are around our Southwest Everett industrial area. These are about 60 to 70 acre maintenance facilities. The name can sound scary, but it actually brings about 500 good paying jobs and is pretty quiet and pretty clean for a maintenance facility. Good examples in Bellevue, they just built one. That's probably the best example. The East Link maintenance facility was just built. Just focusing on downtown Everett a little bit because that's so important to the city. You can see that the representative project in pink and then those other options. I wanted to flag that the city has expressed a preference previously. This was through the Metro Everett. We knew that light rail was likely or was definitely going to come to downtown Everett and did some work through the Metro Everett planning process. Some of you were likely here and supported that effort. And through that, the city developed a position that we would prefer the station to be closer to downtown than Everett Station, possibly around Broadway and Pacific, and hopefully designed in a manner that might help with the grade change, that hill that comes up from Smith all the way up to kind of a high point or between Oaks and Colby. And this was our vision that is in Metro Everett, and as far as I know, remains the city's vision for now. That would be some pretty significant construction and projects that would support this light rail, like a rebuild of Pacific Avenue between Broadway and the railroad tracks to bring it up a level, and hope that we could get some help with that grade and a possible pedestrian crossing over Broadway. And here are the proposed comments that are in that comment letter in brief. The first one is that we hope to find $600 million plus a couple hundred more million to open all 4 stations within Everett by 2037. We talked about the comp plan and the big growth targets and light rail. I would not put all my cards on light rail generating all of that growth, but it is definitely a big deal, and it's definitely necessary for those reasons that are in the project need. I-5 is terrible. We need better transportation options. And it is undeniable that when the light rail comes, if anybody's been down to the U District lately, or the new Spring District between Bellevue and Redmond, or Linwood for that matter, the cranes go up as soon as the light rail is either imminent or open. So we need the help. Everett's been waiting a long time for light rail service and has been paying into Sound Transit for a long time. We understand the revenue constraints and the cost escalation that the agency is facing, and I don't think we can raise $800 million within the city, but we'll certainly work with our regional, state, and federal partners to do everything that we can to try to close that financial gap and try to get all 4 stations within Everett open by 2037. One of the stations is listed as a provisional station. That's the Airport Road and Evergreen Way station. So that means that even with the $600 million, even if we find that $600 million, we weren't planning on building that station anyways as part of this round. That was going to be subject to future funding coming from somewhere at some future time. It definitely seems to me inefficient to build a light rail line except for a station and then come back in and build the station later. Definitely seems more efficient and effective to just build the whole thing in one fell swoop. If you're already in there doing heavy construction, you don't want to button up a construction site and then reopen it again 5 or 10 years later to build that station. So our overarching and worth multiple points of emphasis goal is to open all 4 stations within Everett by 2037. That said, $800 million is an enormous amount of money, and we accept that we may not be successful at attracting that money or cutting costs elsewhere along the line to close that gap. And if so, we do recognize that we may have to have a provisional station remain. In that case, we are interested in learning more about whether that could be the Airport Road or the SR 526 and Evergreen Way stations. There are some arguments on either side. Under the current realignment plan, that first segment with Airport Road would open sooner than that second segment with SR 526 and downtown Everett. And we just wanted to see how those different alternatives perform. Like we said with the last agenda item with the comprehensive plan update, if you don't study it, you don't know how it performs, and you're not able to make the best decision possible given whatever the financial or otherwise context is going to be at that time. So we are asking Sound Transit to just take a look at if in the unfortunate event that we have to have a provisional station, which one of those might make the most sense, thinking of connections to our bus rapid transit lines and the rest of our transit network, thinking of just its interface with the neighborhood and all of those things. We want to support the Southwest Everett Manufacturing and Industrial Center as a key purpose of the project. That is an economic driver for the region and for the state, and it needs to have the full support of every piece of infrastructure investments and land use. This is going to be, you saw all those operations and maintenance facility locations around there. We want to make sure that we're not, if possible, displacing strategic aerospace businesses or the space needed for those aerospace businesses to grow and feed off of each other. So we just wanted to make sure that that is well acknowledged as an important component of this project. We'd like to design the project to maximize station area development potential. So you see, if you go around the region, and maybe we can take Planning Commission on a tour of these station areas, as you'll be working on planning our own station areas in the future. Some of these stations are small, and some of these stations are very big. The bigger stations allow for, multiple bus bays or passenger drop-off pickup, parking, all sorts of things that are definitely supportive of the station, but that can also lead to a situation where you have to walk a half mile before you're even out of the station, and it really cuts down that ability to attract transit-oriented development immediately adjacent to the station. We want to provide easy transfers to local transit and want to hope that through buses and everything can move through the area efficiently as well. I think I've heard support for kind of on street stops and reducing some of the circulation and all that's within the station area. So can we make these small and get off your train, get on your bus, and get on your way, kind of a thing. Extending that Link Blue Line to Airport Road, the service, if we go, sorry, I'm gonna make all the way back here. If you see the blue and the pink line there, so the blue line is actually gonna go all the way, those are two different lines. One is gonna go to Redmond, it'll turn left in downtown Seattle, go across I-90 to Bellevue and then up to Redmond. And then the other one, I think it's the pink line, will turn right and go to West Seattle, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, they're two different lines, and everything past that blue line is going to be about half the frequency, as I understand it, as it will be just south. We have a ton of development potential on Evergreen Way, and that is one of the focuses for our development. If you look at buildable lands, most of the housing and employment capacity is along those arterials. We also have our marquee bus rapid transit line operating now, the Swift Blue Line on that corridor. And it would seem a shame to have half of the trains stop at Mariner just short of connecting to the Highway 99 Evergreen Way corridor, which is one of the most important commercial corridors for every city up and down the 99 corridor. So we're hoping, and maybe this is something that could happen in concert with the operations and maintenance facility location, that hopefully those trains could go just, I think it's 1 mile farther and make it to Airport Road and give that full frequency to the connections to Evergreen Way. Almost done here. Frequent service, of course, a light rail line is only a piece of the puzzle. You need to have the operations for it too. So we're planning on frequent service all the way up to downtown Everett. Need to pay attention to non-motorized connections. And then overall, we saw that those lines on the maps that I just showed you we couldn't think of anything to really quibble with. So the screening process did its job within the constraints that we're given, such as being generally consistent with the representative alignment. We thought that these initial alternatives looked okay. That's about it. Next steps, scoping period. We're bringing this letter to the council tomorrow evening for their approval. Then we'll send it on to Sound Transit to get into the formal record. Anybody out there who's listening, feel free to send in your own comment letter as well. You can learn all the information in the early scoping information report. When this gets PDF'd and put on the website, you can just click on that for a link. You can also find it at everettlink.participate.online, and Sound Transit has great materials that explain the process where we're at now. Happy to take any questions or comments, suggestions.
I think Commissioner Finch has a question or comment.
I do. York, I'm looking at page 8 of the Sound Transit Everett League Extension November 21 report.
Yeah.
And it shows one provisional station at SR 99 and Airport Road. It shows the 3 further north stations as new station areas. And then in reading the letter, I wasn't clear that the letter tracks this graphic.
Tell me. So you said page 8? What
Yes,
page?
this is the early scoping information report of November 21.
Okay, I'll put this up on my screen. Look at it. And here we go. So we're looking at this map here.
That's correct.
Okay. So sorry, what is the question? So yeah, Airport Road and SR 99 is in ST3. It is labeled as the provisional station. So as of right now, with the project financing, even before realignment or anything, we were going to build this line without a station at Airport Road. You do all the planning for it, all the design for a provisional station. You just don't do the actual construction. Hopefully you make it so you don't have to shut down the line while you're doing construction, other than some weekends too. But
and so with the realignment, as it's being called, which I still don't appreciate that name, but with the realignment, what are the other two provisional stations now? Are there two more provisional or one more provisional station?
Yeah, what realignment did is, so there's no new provisional stations. What realignment did is it said that in between that we're going to build it to here, get these stations open. So West Dollarwood, Ashway, Mariner, and Southwest Everett are going to open in 2037. And then the rest of the line is going to open in 2041, 4 years later. And that's because the financing with our debt capacity limit for the agency, just by waiting, you get more money. Tax revenue comes in every year. They're issuing bonds to build this, and they're basically seeing a pinch point in their debt capacity limit that is set under state statute. And so you could kind of think of it as like they're going to, instead of building all the way to Everett by 2037, which was the original plan in ST3, that they're going to build to here and then wait for the money to catch up and then finish building. What we're saying about the provisional station is kind of overlaps on that, but is a slightly different thing. And it's saying that we don't want this to be provisional. We want this to be built. We want this to be built too. We want them all built, ideally by 2037. But we are curious in the relative performance if we were to have a provisional station. So if we're not able to find a station costs $100 or $200 million, I think. Probably varies very widely, elevated or surface and whatnot. But if we do have to build a provisional station, should that be Airport Road or should it be Evergreen Way? And there's that overlapping thing that, you know, Airport Road would be built earlier than Evergreen Way would. Either way, our overarching priority is to get them all built. But that comment in there is about just studying which one of these two
I see. Okay.
perform better if built earlier.
I guess my only other comment on the letter, which I thought was good, and I agree with the bolded priorities that were set out in the letter, is that this is it's written from a planning focus, which I appreciate, especially because of the authorship and the audience. But at the same time, this is also representative of the voice of the city of Everett and the citizens. And I guess I would like to see it a little bit more assertive. As I understand it, you know, Everett citizens have been paying taxes to fund this system since the late 90s. And because there is a significant financial shortfall, shouldn't fall at our feet. And so I would like to see, I guess, a little more forward language, a little more compelling, because I think that we are deserving of that. And if we are going to accommodate these growth targets that we have agreed to burden ourselves with, which I think is a great thing, we definitely need this transit to make it all the way to the most northern tip of the line.
Thank you. Yeah, you definitely pick up that this is written from staff to staff, kind of inside the process type of language, and it's recognizing the particular purpose that scoping plays, and it's setting the stage for those kinds of comments. But it is a comment, as you said, on behalf of the people of Everett, and it should reflect what the people are hollering. And I think you're right about that point. I've heard that from my mayor and other staff on the team. So when I bring this to the council tomorrow, I didn't want to make this too complicated with these two meetings back to back and ask for the planning commission's formal recommendation or anything like that, because that would just complicate with the planning or the council's packet going out a week or even more ago. But I will find an opportunity to relay that point if the council members don't pick up on it themselves, which would not surprise me at all.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, and thank you for sharing this letter in advance.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? Let's maybe then ask if there's anyone from the public, any citizens who wish to comment on this matter. We can go ahead and hear from you now. Go ahead, as we did before, just go ahead and unmute yourself and we will recognize you. I will take that as a pass. So it doesn't look like there's any citizen comments. Come back one more time. Any commissioners with anything else? Well, thank you very much for this presentation, York. Any final closing comments from staff?
Happy New Year. Thank you for a good year, and I appreciate all your help this evening and throughout the year. I hope you all have wonderful holidays. I hope you get a chance to see some family and enjoy the lights that we put up to try to stave off the deep darkness of the season. And our next meeting is January 4th or 5th, but either way we may cancel it. We'll see if we have materials for you or not, so stay tuned for that. And then we've got some thoughts about how to structure the next year in terms of your meeting schedule and all that. Maybe we'll cover that at our first meeting of the year, whenever that is. Thank you again, Commissioner Beck. I hope you stay engaged in the commission's work and in the city, but thank you either way for your service and all of your volunteer hours over the years.
Yeah, coming back to Commissioner Beck, would you have any closing thoughts or wise words you'd like to impart upon us as your service on the commission comes to a close? Not to put you on the spot. I guess I'm not seeing it. Actually, she's still with us.
Adam, I think she departed around 7:53.
Oh, okay. Well, this is not obviously an ideal situation, being remote, to really kind of recognizing for this kind of goodbye. But yeah, I will just echo the comments. Thank you to Commissioner Beck for your years of service and all of your input. I know I came onto the commission when she was already a seasoned member, and appreciate all of her input and leadership and guidance and her service as chair previous to me as well. So thank you, Commissioner Beck. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything. Okay, well, with that, looking forward to everybody have a great holiday season, and we'll wrap this year up and come back next year with gusto. So with that, we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Did I?